Good morning. So I am Micallef. So I am a lecturer assistant professor at Swansea University in the UK. So together with my colleagues, Tania, who is a PhD student at Indiana University, and Samir, who is an associate professor at University of Utah. So we investigate the view of young adults on parental sharing of children's photos. So the practice of parents sharing content, photos, statuses, videos about their children is often referred to as parenting, which is a portmanteau of the words parenting and sharing. So as detailed in the article shown in the slide, parenting is a common practice, very common practice. So 75% of parents have shared content of their children on social media. Now, the sharing is connected to harms related to digital technologies and to the impact of an individual's actions on the privacy of others. So content shared by their parents has the potential of resulting in negative consequences for the children by increasing surface and vectors of security and privacy violations. I'm talking about identity theft, uninformed information disclosure, and other similar harms. Now, the literature has studied parenting several times and has looked at the perceptions of parents, children, and adolescents. But people who have experienced parenting, the children have experienced parenting, have grown up and now they are becoming young adults. So what we do in our study, we want to see how perceptions have changed or stay the same when children grow up, so when they become young adults. So to address this gap, we wanted to understand how young adults perceive parental sharing of content about their children. And we wanted to understand whether these perceptions change on whether they experience parenting when they're children. So did that affect their perceptions? We also wanted to understand whether the relationship with children, with the children in the photo, has an effect on their perceptions. And these young adults have also become parents, so we want to understand whether becoming a parent changes the perceptions. So those were the 4 research questions that we seek to answer. So how do we do that? So we do that by asking questions about 3 items. The 3 items are the motives used for sharing photos, the types of photos that are shared, and the audiences with whom they share the photos. So for the motives, we define 10 motives that are shared, that are compiled in the literature, that are usually used for sharing photos. So example of motives for sharing photos, archiving childhood or showing pride in the child. For phototypes, we selected 19 sensitive phototypes related to children from previous work by Lee et al., who has looked at sensitive phototypes at from a broader perspective. And for phototypes, example is child in bathroom or child with food. Those are the kind of phototypes that we were investigating. And for phototypes, what it did was that we asked participants whether it is acceptable to share those phototypes, but for specific age groups. So infant or toddler, preschooler, middle childhood, teenager. So is it acceptable to share child in the bathroom for an infant or for a teenager? So that's what we asked our participants. And then for acceptable audiences, what we did was we asked participants whether it's acceptable to share photos for different kind of audiences. We used 4 audiences: close friends, friends, followers, and connections, future or current employers, and the general public. So the study flow. So first, those who consented to participate after reading information about the study procedure to the questions to determine eligibility. Afterwards, we asked participants about their personal practices regarding sharing photos on social media. And then we asked participants if any of their parents had ever shared their photos on social media during childhood. If one of their parents had shared the photos on social media, we asked them a set of questions about the practice of their parents, again, related to motives, types of photos, and acceptable audiences. And then, all participants went into the main study. But what we did for all participants is we divided them in 3 between subject conditions based on the relationship with the child in the photo. So we had one group which focused on the photos of oneself as a child. So they answered 3 questions on motives, phototypes, and acceptable audience based on photos of themselves as children. The second group answered questions based on photos of one's child, real or hypothetical. And the third group answered questions based on photos of anyone's child. So the purpose here was to understand whether they would answer differently based on the relationship with the child in the photo. Because we were hypothesizing that there will be some differences. There wasn't, but I will talk about that later. Then we asked about privacy, so some questions based on literature about privacy, and finally we collected demographics of the participants. So the inclusion criteria was 18 to 30 years old, because we are recruiting young adults, lived their entire life in the United States, and to be familiar with photo sharing on Instagram or Facebook. So to make sure that we collect a broad and diverse sample of participants, we used MTurk, but we also used Reddit and online classifieds at the university and in physical locations around Bloomington, Indiana. So after filtering based on attention checks, we ended up with 382 valid responses, which were 238 from MTurk and 144 from Reddit and the other sources. So yeah, some description of the sample. So the mean age was 25.82, 28, and most of our participants identified as female. And so we had 163 parents in our sample, and 264 of our participants reported that they had experienced their parents sharing their photos during childhood. Yeah, and with regards to the 3 conditions that I mentioned before, we had quite an equal distribution into the conditions. So 124 answered questions as themselves as children, 136 answered questions as on their own children, real or hypothetical, and 122 answered questions about anyone's child. So this was quite evenly distributed. So let's talk a bit about the findings. So I'm just going to provide high-level overview of the findings. I'm not going to show numbers or anything like that. So please read the paper for the exact and the detailed findings. I wanted to point out that you can look also at the code and at the raw data. Of course, anonymized raw data. Because the artifact has just been awarded the 3 badges from the USENIX Artifact Review Committee. It's available online, so you can download that. So for the first research question, we wanted to understand how young adults perceive parental sharing of content about their children. So the overall overview of young adults, what did they perceive? So with regards to motives for sharing content on social media, we found that typical social media use, I'm referring to keeping in touch with family and friends, archiving the childhood, showing pride in the child. So typical social motives related to typical social media use was significantly more acceptable than motives related to material or negative outcomes. So material or negative outcomes, I'm talking about increasing online popularity, earning money by advertising, making others envious. So typical social media use was significantly more acceptable than these negative or material outcomes. Now, acceptability of audiences. So young adults reported that close friends were the most acceptable audience for them to share children photos. And this was significantly more acceptable than the 3 other audiences. So significantly more acceptable than friends, followers, or connections, than current potential employers or general viewers public. So that was the main overall finding with regards to acceptability of photos. Now, how do perceptions vary based on actually experiencing sharing when they were children? Actually, it's quite influential because those that did experience sharing when they were children found it more acceptable to share highly sensitive photos with a more diverse audience. So they were ready to share the photos with socially distant audiences. So as you can see how influential it is to have experienced sharing when you were a child. Now, so the relationship with the child in the photo. So our hypothesis was that this would be quite influential. However, it wasn't. So there were, and you can read the paper, there were some minor effects, some minor differences, but it wasn't as effective as we were thinking. So relationship, it doesn't matter who is the child in the photo. So participants had similar perceptions on whether the photos had to be shared. Yes, so now, being a parent. So being a parent was a bit influential as well. So for example, non-parents were more comfortable in sharing less sensitive photos, while parents were more comfortable to share photos with more socially distant audiences. So being a parent is also an influential factor. All right, so considering these findings, we propose some interventions regarding children's security and privacy. So first of all, we suggest the development of various solutions for social media platforms, such as features that seek additional confirmation from parents before sharing highly sensitive photos. But we also suggest non-technical solutions, like for example, the design of laws and regulations to raise obligation of care and diligence when adults share content about social media. We also suggest to implement digital literacy campaigns to tell parents that, listen, the privacy of children is very important. All right, so in conclusion, also we fill this gap in the literature by providing perspectives of young adults on parental sharing of photos of their children. So our findings reflect a tendency for normalization of parental sharing of content about their children, making it really important that we now change this and make it more normalized for people to protect the privacy of their children rather than not just sharing content. That's all. Thank you.